Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2025 NACCA Forum, Ignite Indigenous Prosperity. Come on, let's hear it. Ignite, and we're already fired up. My name is Stan Wesley. I'll be your Gani Gatach for the next couple days. You're probably wondering, what does Gani Gatach mean? It means the one that breaks the trail when you're hunting, when somebody's always kind of walking out front. I was working back home a few years ago, and they said, "You're not an MC anymore." I'm like, "Okay, cool. You're not just a speaker anymore." I said, okay, cool. I said, we're going to call you Kaniga Nigatach. That's going to be your traditional term as the one who leads, the one who stands out front. So this is me, Stan Wesley. I'm really, really pumped to be here. I was here last year, and I did a pretty good job. They asked me to come back again, so I'm really, really happy. My kids, my 9-year-old and 12-year-old also give their greetings. My wife gives her greetings, and collectively they all say, "Gazagihitana," which means in Cree, they love you all. And I was telling my little ones about how I feel when I'm in a room like this. I tell them that I am surrounded by love because people that are here love our people. So give it up for the love that's in the room, everybody. We're not afraid to say that. Verna McGregor, let's get started ceremony. Oh, by the way, let's go to for Spirit Wolf, man. They rocked it at the beginning. That was really good. Let's get it one more time for Spirit Wolf. My dear friend Verna is going to lead off what we've always led off since the beginning of time on these beautiful ancestrals and unsurrendered territory of Algonquin. My dear friend. Let's start off. Let's hear it one more time. Let's give a massive round of applause for Elder, everybody. Come on, let's bring it. Let's bring it for Verna.
My name is Verna McGregor, and I'm from Kitagon-Zibi, Nishnabeg, which is 140 kilometers north of here. I just arrived about 20 minutes ago, so I came from the north real fast. And I'm honored to be here. What I said to as well is Fox is my clan on my mother's side, and Thunderbird's my clan on my father's side, because prior to contact, and I said this yesterday here, but it was a smaller group. Prior to contact, that's how we would introduce ourselves coming into the territory, because our clan system was based on the watershed, because we're known for the birch bark canoe, and there's whole teachings to the canoe, which represents balance. Because you know that too as well, if you put all your money these days on one side, your canoe might tip, you're off balance. And we would meet here, and we're known as the Omamaninawag, which was also the nomads, because we would move from hunting grounds to hunting grounds, depending also on the season and the game. And with colonization, that upset that whole understanding. And I'd like to welcome you here to our traditional unceded lands. What does unceded mean is that we never signed treaty, because I said the bush was too thick and we could hide. Because I said, here they come with their paper again, hide! No. But what I do too as well these days is I do a lot of openings, and I've been talking a lot, especially to the federal government and other organizations, on the contrast of the Native understanding and a non-Native understanding. And I grew up on reserve. My mother was very active. She started also the Algonquin language program in the 60s, and I would help her. And but she got a lot of pushback to that, not only from the outside, from our own people, but it was not understanding our history and our history of trauma in residential schools, and the shame also, and the fear. So we're overcoming that. So really quickly too, my background too has been in economic development, but in addition, throughout these years, I would also sit in the lodge with my mother and William, Commanda, and other elders, and talk about the concern they had, but also too as well, William was still the carrier, and we still have these wampum belts And one of them is a 7-fire prophecy belt. And part of that was was foretold the times we're in. It foretold the coming of the newcomers here, but also too as well, there'll become a time where we're at a crossroads where, and it has 7 diamonds on it, and the middle diamond has 2 crossing diamonds on it, and it represents that crossroads. And the 7 diamonds represents that we're here also for the 7 generations and the 7 nations. 7 nations is not just human nations. It was the ones that fly, the ones that swim, the ones that crawl, the trees. So again, so here we are, and I find that interesting that we are at this crossroads, because I'm going to a meeting after this too on the coastal communities, that how do they address and mitigate this climate change. And I sort of, it's mostly non-native people in the meeting, and I always say, too, as well, yes, for mitigation, they may have no choice to move. I said, I think that's why we were nomadic too. And I also say I also bring my, I do a lot of climate change openings too, and I bring my canoe, and especially too, I had the car industry, and I said, we traveled carbon-free. And sometimes too, they just, shut me off. No. But I always talk about now the significance of why we would meet here in the summer. This spot too is very special. There's archaeological sites here because we were always on the river. And because this site though in Ottawa, it was the confluence of the rivers coming together from the 4 directions. And the Chaudière Falls here was so special because you'd go through to, we would offer tobacco, and they have that in the archives, to the falls. And again, too, it's with reverence, because what I do too as well is I have my tobacco, and what I do is I offer it to the sacred fire in meetings, so that it's our connection from the physical world to the unseen world, or I offer it to the falls, because the smoke or the mist brings up our intent of us coming together in a good way. And again, too, when I say that too as well, I talk a lot about the medicine wheel. This represents for us, because we still have sites here. There's one up by Canada that it represents the circle. Everything's in circles, the moon, the sun, the earth. It represents for us, we had a story, I always remember my mom telling us a story when we were little kids, that there's 4 colors of people on this earth. But regardless of our differences, the colors of our skin, our beliefs, our language, what binds us together is that we all share this earth. We share the 4 elements. We share the earth, we share the waters, we share the fire, and we share the air. Going back to the fire, I said that piscanese, no go, that you're going to ignite yourselves. Hopefully, Stan will ignite you. But the fire represents too as well, not just the physical fire of making fire, there's also the fire of the sun, the moon, and for us the moon is women are the keepers of the water, and the moon controls the water with the tides, and men are keepers of the fire. And both balance each other in order to bring in the next generation. But one of the biggest teachings too, regardless of our differences, we all belong in the circle. But also though too as well, so we all share the elements. And I was saying yesterday too as well, going back to the fire, there's the fire of the sun that makes everything grow. Our internal fire is why we're here, to ignite new enterprises or new understandings too. And also too as well, now I forgot what I was going to say. But anyway, this is at the center too. It represents also too the 4 directions. You have north, south, east, west, cold in the north, warm in the south. The sun comes up in the east, goes down in the west. It also represents your journey here. In us, our teachings is that we come here, but we also come here to face challenges, opportunities, and challenges, and we take on also assignments. And so we take our first breath, like the coming up of the sun, and we start our earth walk as infants, toddlers to adolescents to young adults to full adults. And I always sigh here. I said, here comes middle age. And in preparation, return back to spirit. So I think too, and if we're all gifted to become elderly, because sometimes we're called back before that, because of our assignments. So one of the teachings of the canoe also is that we honor everybody's journey here. And what it is too as well, this is the birch bark canoe. It teaches us balance, but our journey here. And this is also our history book that I brought because we created it to also change the paradigm, because we are in a process of paradigm shift, which is what the next meeting I'm going to. But again, too, one of the biggest things, too, going back to my background, I worked after I got out of university, I went to work at Indian and Northern Affairs, but I didn't stay there long. I went into real estate because I didn't understand, coming from the reserve, what was so fascinating about this real estate. So I sold real estate here in Ottawa for about 6 years. I was like 19. And then I went to work for the Royal Bank. I was assistant manager in the branches. And then went home. Then I realized how much we were cut out of this whole financing system. So what I did is I wanted to connect back with our people. And I went to work for the Assembly of First Nations. And there I started saying, you know what, we need our own banking system. And I would make little briefing notes. But at the same time, they were talking about this First Nations Bank of Canada. And that led to, for me, I ended up leaving AFN, but went to work on this financing task force. And there they were looking at the national banks, the federal incorporated banks. So anyway, what happened there is I left I finished with the task force, and I moved back to my community. And I was the ACDEV officer, and one of my projects was the maple syrup, and I forgot to bring it up here. What was different too as well, our tagline was blending tradition with technology. How do we bring in we have a state-of-the-art maple syrup processing facility. We started at 10,000 taps. Today it's at 18,000 taps. But we also brought back the ceremonial understanding and brought in the children. And the tagline is blending tradition with technology. And the traditional understanding of the maple syrup is that within the spring, when the sap starts to run, it's like the Mother Earth bringing in new life. Just like when women are about to give birth, it's the breaking of the water. So it's just changing that paradigm, and I think that's why you're here too as well, because I remember working at AFN and one person coming in and they go, why don't you First Nations just economically develop like everybody else? And that was, I liked the interesting question. And it was because sometimes we have a different sensibility. And I think today with this climate change, we're going to need that sensibility to bring in. We need to do things differently. And again, sometimes that causes conflict. But again, it's bringing back that understanding because we're here for the next 7 generations. So on that note, I'm going to ask you to stand. Not just Stan has to stand. And I'm going to say a little opening prayer. And I have my little tobacco here from yesterday. And it's to honor all of you and your journey here. So I say, miigwech. Ojeni gashkitochaman dosek oje non go momi kakinapamad sijik in his wagonshe. Shwen mishnon in abigis. We dokwa kakina denis wagonje onje momweo dumpta when in abigis. Miigwech onje kakina gagisha and don onje mom de gen in the kimanon. Shkaki question kaso in the kimanon. We dokwa kakina pamazajik. Denis wagonje chinagadwab don kakina guchin in the kimanon mom de gay nishna berki. Migwech onche kakina ete kishago. Kizis to be kizis a shichanung shak. We do kwa yan no kamis non on jen agrawabdan kakina guch yan nibi punksing, CB, Saigon, Kichikagam. We do kwa mom de game nimishomsen non kizis a shij on agrawabdan kakina guch yapamadza jigdan is waga shij. We do kwa gya kwa gonje nagrawabdan kakina guch nibi a shij ininawa gonje nagrawabdan kakina guch yishkude. Migwech onche na sewen, gagimijin. Chiminopomadzian, we do kwa kakina, Mam de Gata Jacques a Jignon Gom, Mammy COVID-19, Chimaji, Majika, the Shich Kakina Guchia Akazuin. We do kwa kakina in Jino and Daganak, Mam de Gana Mishomsin, non Negokmas, non a Shich Nebashka Dagmagnan, Dabano Jishak, want to get Kamashe Denizwa, Gonche, Shish Kakina Guja, Westney Suck, Pemisu, Jik, Pamadage, Jik, Pamudage, Jik, Nawagada, Jik, Mijim, Jik, Kakina Guj, Chiminoyak, Chiminopamadzu watch, a shich, we do quag, Mom de Gay, we wissen, a Jik, the Magas, a Jik, Arcos, a Jik, Kaye, we me got a Jik, non gom. Chuana ki watch on J Minopamadzu watch, a Nabigus, Conchesquat Neguede Seaman, Kego, a Shitchan, and Ojguch Neguede Seaman, Shuen Mishnon in Abigus. Miigwech, yeah, miigwech. What I do is, this is, it's a prayer of thankfulness. And I say miigwech 4 times again to honor the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 stages of your life. And that also too as well, this also represents your emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental, that you find balance at the center. And I find that interesting here today too, that we would meet here, and the significance of that in Parliament Hill is at that confluence in all the federal departments. So we're all here and we need to find our balance and find our voice, because one of the teachings of this is also, it's also the dream catcher, but it's also the web of life. And one of the things is that it represents that everything is interconnected. What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. And I find it interesting today too that we have the World Wide Web. And it's like the web of life. But again, too, like everything, it could go out of balance, because my next meeting is on AI, the next evolution.
Let's hear it for Verna. Let's give it up for Spirit Wolf. Come on, let's hear it. Ho! Have you achieved your white balance, young man? Okay, there we go, here we go. You ready? Whoosh, there you go, going your way. There's a lot of good friends here I have in the room. I'm looking forward to seeing you and giving some proper hugs or handshakes as we go throughout the day. I'll check in with you later. Up next, everybody, we have the NACCA Chair. Oh boy, she's proud. Look at her go, everybody. Let's give it up for the Chair of NACCA, Elaine Chambers. Like the break in my voice there, Verna?
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Elder McGregor, for your welcome to the Algonquin unceded territory and the Spirit Wolf Singers. And welcome everybody to this year's Prosperity Forum. My name is Elaine Chambers. I'm a member of the Champagne and Ajax First Nation out of the Yukon, and I'm proud to be the chair of the NACCA Board of Directors, your host organization. Our theme this year is Ignite Indigenous Prosperity, and it couldn't be more timely as we're witnessing this flame, the flame of Indigenous business development that spread throughout our nation. And with the exciting news that was announced yesterday, NACCA has signed the first Indigenous organization agreement, a 10-year agreement with ISK for $514 million. So it's a very proud moment. So our theme couldn't be fitting more with Flame of Indigenous Business Development. So I've been with the Indigenous Financial Institution movement pretty much from its beginning, from back in the 1990s. The organizations I've led for decades, Don and I Ventures, which is based out of Whitehorse, Yukon, and we were one of the founding members of NACCA. At this time, we are all clustered around a small flame that a strong gust of wind always seems to be threatening to put out. That's why we founded NACCA. At that time, they were trying to merge the IFIs with BDC at the time, and that's when we formed the organization. There was about 9 IFIs that took that direction forward and started the organization. The government at that time thought we'd be all folded and sunk within 5 years, but look at us, how strong we are and how we've grown. By tending that flame together, by speaking with one voice as an association of Indigenous leaders from coast to coast to coast, we thought we could protect that flame better. Maybe one day we would even ignite a passion of Indigenous business developments happening across the country. We spoke to government, to our nations, to the public, to anybody who would listen about the potential Indigenous business development. We spoke of the spark of innovation we knew was there because we've seen it with our own eyes, the spark that has smothered by the Indian Act, by residential schools, by the lack of generational wealth or personal credit history, but it was still there. We tended it by issuing developmental loans to our Indigenous institutions across the country. In partnership with government, with our own Indigenous communities, our network offered capital and startup expansions. At first, it was a small business offering crucial services to gas bars, convenience stores, hair salons, outfitting businesses, small retailers, and construction firms offered jobs, income, self-reliance. Later, some of us added larger operations run by community corporations and individual owner to our portfolios. Some members still lend individual farmers and fisheries, and to trappers and stuff which are important to our territories. Other institutions finance large-scale operations to grow, manufacture, and ship their products to the world. The one constant is our client entrepreneurs from our regions, authentic, bona fide members of our nations and communities. For our own success, ignite further positive change. Later at the forum, you'll hear from Professor Ken Coates, who will present his recent research of Indigenous businesses in Canada. What did he find? He found that Indigenous businesses activity, and I quote, is the most consequential and effective poverty reduction program in Canada. Professor Coates also found that Canada's prosperity is tied to Indigenous prosperity. There is no other way. Today we hear about companies pulling their headquarters from Canada, placing them in other countries they see as more favorable. Not our businesses. Our people are not going anywhere. These are our lands and we have rights to them and the desire to share Canada's opportunities. Because this is our home, we'll continue stewardships for our ancestors and the future generations. And in this tumult, a flame of perseverance that our peoples have long carried may help warm us. But with further ado, let me introduce this year's agenda. For the next 2 days, the fire we've nurtured will be on full display. Today, for example, we'll hear from our international counterparts, Indigenous representatives from New Zealand and Australia, as well consider how Indigenous businesses foregoing a new supply chains and shifting in the political landscapes. We'll hear about nations taking part in major projects and how they are benefiting our communities. We'll hear about Indigenous tourism initiatives, including success stories that translate meaningful culture and experience into economic growth for our communities. We'll hear about the panel on Indigenous procurement, which will share best practices in procuring goods and services from our Indigenous businesses. And tomorrow we'll hear more warming stories, an opening keynote from Indigenous Growth Fund, Canada's Indigenous Managed Investment Fund. We'll also hear from a fireside chat on the highlights of the fund's impacts on Vancouver Island. We'll hear from Indigenous youth who advise NACCA at its development, its Indigenous Youth Entrepreneurship Program. We'll learn from initiatives of the Indigenous Prosperity Foundation, which NACCA founded last year to drive philanthropic investment for early stage of Indigenous entrepreneurs. And last, we'll hear from the research findings I told you about earlier. Professor Ken Coates, our final presenter, will tell you about the steady growth and the white-hot intensity of Indigenous economic activity in the country. Throughout, we'll be joined by our partners in government and corporate Canada, by government executives, parliamentaries, and many general managers and chairs who oversee the operations of Indigenous financial institutions from coast to coast to coast. And believe you me, if you want to learn how business development really happens in our Indigenous communities, talk to some of my colleagues, general managers, the chairs throughout this room. They have seen it firsthand. I welcome all our colleagues representing Indigenous organizations in Canada and internationally, and representatives of First Nations and Inuit businesses. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our sponsors, and special thanks to our board of directors and staff at NACCA who have invested countless hours to ensure this event will go without a hitch. We fanned what we began as a small flame of Indigenous entrepreneurship for decades, and now is ignited as a nationwide passion. Let's celebrate the success of our movement, and let's tend to the fire for the next 2 days. Goodness these.
Right on, Elaine. Good job. Good job, Elaine. Thank you. She's right, you know. Lots of dedicated NACCA staff here. I'm really proud and honored to introduce the AFN National Chief to say a few words. Before our AFN National Chief comes up, I got to say that a couple days ago, National Chief, I was watching the news and I felt tingly. You made me tingle, National Chief. And National Chief made me tingle. How did National Chief make me tingle? She was addressing some of that nonsense that's happening in Alberta. And I was sitting there with my wife, who's a lawyer who does constitutional law, Indigenous rights law. And we're sitting there listening to our National Chief talk about the nonsense that's happening in Alberta right now. I'm paraphrasing. But she says, she's talking to the Albertans out there that want to leave. You can take the little dirt that your ancestors brought here, and you can take it with you. And you can go if you're not happy here. And I just felt so happy, National Chief, because you're speaking from here, and also you're speaking on behalf of me, because it is absolute nonsense, and I love that tone. If you don't like it here, then you can go. I thought that was beautiful. I felt so proud to call you my National Chief, and I'm so happy that you're here. Everybody, let's give it up for the AFN National Chief.
Anin Buju. What an honor to be here, and thank you for that nice story. And we have to stand up for who we are in this country, and this country has to realize that First Nations were here first and foremost before anybody else, and we are foundational partners in this country. And nothing less. We are foundational partners. We created this country together with other people that have come from all over the world. And we welcome you here. And like I said, but if you're not happy, you're free to find your home anywhere else in the world. So I'll leave it at that. Before I go on, I have to say, last month was my birthday, and I married I kind of did some work. I see Paul Prosper in the room. Hello, my friend. Nice to see her. And a First Nation senator. How proud I am every time I see you, my old colleague. So, but last month was my birthday, and I married. And so one of the most important things from a woman's going to decide is, who am I going to have children with? Who am I going to marry? So I found this handsome Anishinaabe man from back home, another community, and I thought, well, he's got his education degree, he's got his business degree. I think I'll have kids with him, So I kind of chose him, thinking he's smart, right? And so about and then I had this dream in, February, and I said to him, "Hun," I said, I had this dream. I said, I dreamt of a necklace and a watch, I said. And he goes, "Just wait until your birthday." And I said, "Oh, all right." So my birthday came, and there was this box. So of course I was busy. I think I was in somewhere, and then of course I wasn't home on my birthday, but the next day I showed up and I was happy to be home. It's Saturday. Every Saturday I try to go home and refresh with my family. And he says, "Oh, there's your gift." Oh, there's a box. So I unwrapped it. And my smart husband, he got me a book, How to Interpret Dreams. So it's Mother's Day this week. To all you men out there. Chimigwech to Elder Verna McGregor for opening us up in a good way this morning and for welcoming us to the unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Nepinak territory. Thank you for speaking the language. Thank you for praying for us, for your guidance and your teachings today. There's just no words, and I'm just so thankful to see you, and I hope I get to meet you in person. After this. Miigwech also to the Spirit Wolf Singers for the beautiful honor song this morning and for starting this event off in a beautiful way. Miigwech to the National Aboriginal Capital Corporation for inviting me to speak at this important prosperity forum. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak, and I'm so thankful to bring greetings on behalf of the Assembly of First Nations, which includes over 634 strong independent nations from coast to coast to coast. As a national political advocacy organization for First Nations, the AFN advances our inherent rights, treaty rights. We co-develop sometimes on policy, on public education and legislation. And it's an honor to be here on behalf of the chiefs and from many of those First Nations. I'm sure when you had planned this forum on these dates that you had no idea that we would be days after one of the most important federal election in this country's history. So in addition to bringing greetings on behalf of the AFN, I will say a few words about last week's election and the central role I believe that First Nations will play in this new administration. First off, we do congratulate Prime Minister Carney and the Liberal Party on their impressive campaign. We look forward to working with him and all members of Parliament in the next Parliament session towards a safe, secure, and prosperous country for all First Nations and for all Canadians. We are in this together. We lift up First Nations candidates, and there were 23 of them. So unprecedented. It's tough, you run for office, everything. People come at you, and so I lift up those 23 folks, 23 First Nation folks, and I and their families. It takes a lot of time away from your families, and even though they were elected or not, we do have 8 that were elected First Nations, and that's the most ever in the Parliament. And I look forward. I seen so many of them yesterday posting photos on Parliament Hill, and I couldn't be prouder. I was like, wow! Like I remember being a little girl, and it was amazing if one person ran. We had 23 this time from all political stripes, and we're not just one party, we're all parties, and some are sovereign even, that don't even believe in the system. So we've got a diversity of people, just like Canada has. We're inspired that they put their name forward, and like I said, we lift them up in this. So we look forward to working with each of them over the coming years, and I look to NACCA to make sure to, if you're ever in this part of the country again, that we invite those members of Parliament and lift them up, and we have a lot to learn from each other. So I want to also acknowledge again Senator Paul Prosper. You want to stand up, give a little wave. And my dear friend, my old boss, Senator Judy White, are you here? Judy? Somebody said, and MP Lemire, are you here from the block? Okay, well, I apparently they're on their way maybe. We also recognize all the leaders from all of the political parties this time that addressed First Nations issues during this campaign. For the first time in history, we had all of them at our doors, asking to speak to First Nations. And I'm so glad that we're seeing that change in this country, because they can't leave us out anymore. And I'm so glad that each and every one of those major political parties, Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, Mark Carney, I'm missing one, Elizabeth May and Jonathan, that co-chaired the Green Party. And I thank all of them, because they came to our forums for First Nations and for the chiefs, and try and work with our leadership to answer questions from our leadership and to gain better understanding of how First Nations are determined to build a new relationship with the Crown, built on mutual respect of our inherent and our treaty rights. So I want to thank them. With the Leaders Forum, I made sure that the Assembly of First Nations, we worked really hard, and I thank the entire team at the AFN. We had published a priorities document during the election called Prosperity for All. And besides fitting for today's theme quite well, the document will be a helpful guide for the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. We made sure every one of them had a copy. We made sure we talked about it during the campaign and that they made those commitments to our people. And so we lift them up and we thank them, and we're going to navigate through these important issues together. In addition to honoring promises and treaties and inherent rights, Prosperity for All calls on the next government to make long overdue investments in First Nations children, families, and future generations through reform of the racist child welfare system, also establishing policing as an essential service and protecting our environment. We also made it clear that First Nations are ready to unlock growth that will drive Canada's collective prosperity in the threatening era of U.S. colonialism. We need to diversify away from our southern, our southern friends. However, will be remiss if I say I feel for our brothers and sisters on the other side of the colonial border that, have told me last week that their hotels are empty, and I don't think that's our intent. Our intent is with the U.S., not with our tribes on that side of the border. That is why, though, however, that Prosperity for All is focused on economic reconciliation. I will focus my remaining time on this topic. We believe at the Assembly of First Nations that economic reconciliation is more than just a moral and legal obligation for Canada. It is a strategic advantage for future generations. That was true before Trump 2.0, and it's even more important now. As the National Chief, I stand with First Nations across this country in strongly condemning the imposition of illegal tariffs by the United States government. We also lift up Prime Minister Carney for his leadership yesterday during his meetings in Washington. The truth is that First Nations have inhabited these territories long before colonial borders were established. Our lands hold vast deposits of critical minerals, forests, and fresh water supplies that sustain communities on both sides of the medicine line. That is why Prosperity for All called on the next federal government to fully include First Nations in Team Canada discussions with premiers and the U.S. officials. Keeping First Nations out of these crucial conversations that impact our treaty and inherent rights is no longer acceptable. In 2025, it is not Team Canada without rights holders at the table. We won't defeat Trump's colonialism with more colonialism here at home. Instead, Canada can demonstrate to the world that we can win by being inclusive and respecting rights, inherent rights, and treaties. Because Canada's gross domestic product is generated off First Nations lands and resources. Over $560 billion of projects are forecast to be launched on our traditional lands over the next decade. The potential benefits are measured in the trillions of dollars, but they won't advance without First Nations support. Prosperity for All document invited each leader to describe their approach to achieving this national potential, starting with Canada's well-documented First Nations infrastructure gap. Because economic reconciliation starts with the basis of development: clean water, quality housing, reliable roads and power supplies, modern schools, and modern healthcare facilities. And to our kids, what's most important and what's really tough and still in some of our communities today, living on reserve just a few years ago, I had to wait till midnight to watch a movie. High-speed internet. We need to get that better for our kids, all of us here in this room and in this country. According to the Conference Board of Canada, A $350 billion investment is needed to close the First Nations infrastructure gap by 2030, and that will generate $635 billion in economic output over the next 7 years and create over 300,000 jobs each year. This means that Canada moves from kind of being one of the last G7 countries in G7 for average annual GDP growth to number 1. Prosperity for All highlighted other key elements of economic reconciliation: ownership of major projects, education and training, and First Nations procurement. So I will say a couple things about that before closing. We lift up NACCA for your leadership and partnership with the Assembly of First Nations on First Nations procurement over the years. Since 2021, we have worked with national organizations to develop a business case for a First Nations-led procurement organization to help overcome systemic barriers. In 2023, First Nations in Assembly passed a resolution in favor of creating a dedicated First Nation procurement authority. Because when we talk about problems with the federal government, we have to start with Canada's loose standards of First Nations and Indigenous identity. Properly deployed, the government's multi-billion-dollar First Nations procurement program can have a significant benefit to the economy. Sadly, instead, pretendians are stealing opportunities from hardworking First Nations businesses. In fact, 1 year ago today, the national news started to report on a massive rise in firms listed as Indigenous in the Federal Registry of businesses eligible for federal contracts. By the end of the year, the Auditor General was launching an investigation into concerns of front companies. We support the Auditor General's investigation, but this should never be a delay to change. We have to change, and we can't be using reports to hold off on that. So we believe the new government has an opportunity to start fresh and to act quickly. That means finally reorganizing and recognizing First Nations must lead the authentication and certification processes for procurement based on definitions that we set. To be recognized, the entrepreneur or the company must be from a nation, and they must know them as their own. Without a connection to the community, there is no benefit to the community. With Prosperity for All and the election complete, we call on the new government within their first year to transfer responsibility for the determination of eligibility to the First Nation-led procurement authority we have proposed together. We also call on the new government to go beyond the 5% minimum First Nation procurement target established by the United Nations Declaration Act across federal government departments, including national defense. On behalf of the Assembly of First Nations, I want to acknowledge and thank the national organizations that will form the Board of Directors of the First Nations Procurement Authority. I'm so proud of all of you. We are confident a First Nations-led organization that will demonstrate a transformative shift in federal policy, empower First Nations businesses, and strengthen local economies. Based on the feedback we received from all parties during the campaign, I believe First Nations issues will play a central role in the success of the next Parliament and of our economy. What we learned from Prime Minister Carney was a commitment to fully and meaningfully advance First Nations priorities. We heard about immediate plans to legislate the right to clean drinking water, close the infrastructure gap, implement the United Nations Declaration, and reform the Child and Family Services Program. So let's add First Nations procurement and economic reconciliation to that list, and let's push together. Our message to Prime Minister Carney and to all party leaders is that the Assembly of First Nations and each and every one of us is ready to engage with you and the next Parliament. We are ready to unlock growth that will drive Canada's collective prosperity for the next century. From the War of 1812, throughout Canada's history, First Nations have bravely fought for this country when it faced a crisis. We saw with the pandemic how global events can overtake our lives at home regardless of where we live. And thankfully, Trump is not an unseeable and unstoppable virus, unlike the pandemic, which separated and isolated us. The global threat is unifying and bringing us closer together than ever before. There's much work ahead, but by strengthening our relations, we can achieve anything. We look forward to productive discussions ahead and a continued cooperation with each and every one of you. So thank you so very much for welcoming me here, for having me, and having the Assembly of First Nations be a part of your deliberations today. Miigwech, gigyaw min minawa min na.